Thank you for joining us in This Week in Turkey. I am Murat, Tursan. Tonight, Russian oligarchs find a new home in Turkey. Medyascope contributor Selim Kuneralp will be joining us for analysis. Is Erdoğan turning a new leaf here and abroad? Medyascope's very own Edgar Şar will lend us his thoughts. The Turkish Treasury is preparing to shell out $1 billion in compensation to depositors, and a religious sect clashes with the police and the government. Our first story tonight, there is a whole lot of very, very expensive maritime traffic in Turkey. Russian oligarchs are flocking to Turkey and bringing their yachts along with them. Sanctioned Russian billionaires who saw their net worths cut as much as by half, Roman Abramovich, Maxim Shubarev, and former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev, have all anchored their luxury vessels in Turkey, potentially looking for a new home to park their cash. Now, Turkey has been adamant about remaining somewhat neutral in the Russia-Ukraine crisis. Turkey has not joined in on the crippling sanctions levied on Russia by the West, as Turkish economy would be hard-pressed to weather it. But is this new influx of Russian oligarchs a net benefit for Turkey? Or is this going to turn into yet another black mark on Turkey's record? Selim Kuneralp will be joining us to shed light on the matter. But let's get the details first.
Russian oligarchs start anchoring their mega yachts in Turkey as they try to avoid the sanctions levied against them after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. This week, Medyascope contributor and shipwatcher Yurak Işık shared images of Russian oligarch Roman Abramovich's $1.2 billion yacht, the Eclipse, anchored in Marmaris, Turkey, while his other yacht, Solaris, is anchored in the city of Bodrum. Dmitry Medvedev, the former Russian Prime Minister and Deputy Chairman of the Russian National Security Council's yacht, the Universe, was also seen in Marmaris this week. The 70-meter superyacht Polaris, owned by Russian millionaire Maxim Shubarev, is now anchored in Göcek Marina, Fethiye. Roman Abramovich, one of the wealthiest and most well-known oligarchs, whose net worth was valued at $14.5 billion last year, is now valued at $7.5 billion in 2022. Abramovich, the owner of Chelsea Football Club in the UK, attempted to sell the club to avoid the sanctions earlier in the month, but was blocked by the UK government.
Back with us on the program, Medyascope contributor Selim Kuneralp. Mr. Kuneralp, great to see you, as always.
Thank you. Thank you for asking me to come.
Always a pleasure. Now, Mr. Kuneralp, you wrote about this very subject on Serbesiyet this week, which I advise everybody to check out, by the way. Now, let's get this out of the way first. Roman Abramovich, Maxim Shubarev, excuse me, those Russian names are really giving me trouble. Maxim Shubarev and Dmitry Medvedev, that one I got right, have all anchored their, for the lack of a better description, floating palaces in Turkey, conceivably because Turkey has not sanctioned anyone so far. But there are a number of countries that have not sanctioned Russia and Russian oligarchs. Sure, Turkey is on that list as well. But why are a whole lot of Russian billionaires flocking to Turkey all of a sudden? Why Turkey in particular? Your thoughts?
Well, I think that Turkey doesn't have a monopoly of these floating palaces, as you call them, quite rightly. There's such a big lot of them that, as I understand, they are all over the place. Many of them are going to places like the Maldives Islands and the Seychelles. There are some in Latin American countries or ports. But at the moment, of course, we seem to have 4 of these ships, which are berthed in Turkey. Of course, they have to move out of European Union waters because, of course, they are subject to sanctions, or their owners are subject to sanctions in the European Union. So I saw, for instance, the other day that the Abramovich ship, which is now in Bodrum, it had to follow a rather convoluted route to avoid Greek territorial waters before reaching Bodrum, and I think the same for the one that went to Marmaris. So in the Mediterranean, of course, they could have gone to North African ports also, but they probably felt that Turkey was a safer destination because it has announced that it tries to keep good relations with both Russia and Ukraine at the same time. So that must be the reason why these 4 ships have landed in Turkish ports, including Medyascope's yacht, which apparently has come all the way to Istanbul today. But I don't know whether many more will come, and the more they come, or the larger the number of ships that take refuge, so to speak, in Turkish waters, the bigger the embarrassment for the Turkish government, it seems to me.
Fair enough, fair enough. And Mr. Kuneralp, in your piece, you liken the oligarchs' yachts to SMS Goben and Breslau. For folks who are unfamiliar, SMS Goben, rather, and Breslau were World War I German battleships that were instrumental in dragging Turkey into the First World War against the Allies. Now, you are rather cautious about Russian yachts coming to Turkey, suffice to say. And you have written that it could turn into another Halkbank corruption scandal, where the state-owned bank was found to be participating in circumventing U.S. sanctions on Iran. Now, many here in Turkey, including some government figures, have been welcoming to Russian billionaires as they may be bringing in some much-needed cash. But you warn that this may turn ugly. Is that right?
Yes, exactly. Of course, when I likened, the warships, the German warships, which indeed eventually took Turkey into the First World War, but it's a long story. I don't think that we have time, to look into that. What I meant was the embarrassment that the arrival of these ships suddenly into the ports of a neutral country like the Ottoman Empire, which is what it was at the time, in August 1914. It eventually started a whole process which ended up with the Ottoman Empire being allied to Germany in the First World War. I do not think that the yachts can by themselves lead Turkey into such a situation. That is not what I meant, but the embarrassment that they create is similar, and particularly, what you just mentioned, namely that the arrival of funds belonging to oligarchs who themselves are under sanctions in European countries or United States or elsewhere, that would create a problem. And because, of course, not implementing sanctions is one thing, but helping to poke holes in sanctions is something else. And if Turkey was actively pursuing a policy of being attractive to Russian oligarch capital, then of course that would attract the attention of European and American and other countries that do apply sanctions. And I understand that this is already the case. I read an article today that indicated that the embassies in Ankara of the relevant countries are following what goes on very closely, and that they have received assurances from the Turkish authorities that there would be no active effort to draw in oligarch capital into Turkey. But at the same time, these European embassies keep a close eye on things, because they want to make sure that this is really the policy that is being followed. And so that's where we are at the moment. We haven't heard, at least I haven't heard, of a massive movement of capital from Russia into Turkey, and So, there's a sort of a wait and see kind of situation at the moment, as far as I can see. But if there was a kind of situation that I just outlined, namely, a lot of Russian capital arriving in Turkey in order to bypass sanctions, that would put us in the same kind of situation as the Halkbank case that you referred to, where the Turkish state bank is being prosecuted in America for having violated U.S. sanctions against Iran. Now, it's all very well to say that Turkey doesn't apply sanctions unless they have been adopted by the United Nations. But when it comes to shifting currency, US dollars and euros around, then I think that the legislation of the relevant countries also has an impact on the question, and so it's best, to my mind, to avoid that kind of situation if one doesn't want too much trouble. And I understand that the authorities in Ankara, at least according to what I've read in today's media, is that they are conscious of the problem, and that they're not sort of jumping with both feet into this thing and trying to use it as an opportunity to settle Turkey's economic problems, which, of course, are many, as you know.
I see. Now, sir, you did say something, and I really wanted to ask you one final question. Now, you just said that Turkey would not be obliged to follow the sanctions unless it were adopted by the United Nations. Is that correct? So let's say if, perchance, the United Nations actually adopts sanctions against Russia and say that Turkey becomes obliged to follow these sanctions. Now, would that in any way affect Turkey's new self-found role of trying to play arbiter between Ukraine and Russia?
Well, what you have just said is quite impossible, because the only authority that can, in the United Nations, that can adopt that kind of sanction is the Security Council, and of course Russia has a veto in the Security Council. And as you know very well, one of the many problems that have arisen as a result of Russia's attack and invasion of Ukraine is that the United Nations has been completely paralyzed. And all the instruments of the United Nations, mainly the Security Council, which are designed to deal with wars of this type, have been proved to be useless in a situation where you have one of the permanent members of the Security Council, which are blatantly violating United Nations the Charter, Article 51 to be more precise. So there's nothing that the United Nations can do, and certainly not adopt sanctions against Russia. But in the past, there have been sanctions adopted against lots of countries by the United Nations, and Turkey has always abided by them. Okay. If you look at the official journal, for instance, once in a while, you will see updated or lists of people who are under sanctions from the United Nations, which are being updated regularly, and whose property, if any, in Turkey is confiscated, and so it isn't as if Turkey was in the business of violating sanctions whenever the opportunity arises. It simply says, I can only abide by sanctions that have been adopted by the United Nations. In this case, it's quite impossible for such sanctions to be adopted. So the question doesn't arise, it seems to me.
I see. Now, one final question real quick. I'm sorry, I'm in a curious mood today since I have you here. Now, yes, Russia is on the UN Security Council, but there has been talk of perhaps ejecting Russia from the UN Security Council. In your words, real quick, how realistic are those claims?
Very unrealistic, it seems to me. I have heard that an attempt is being made to exclude Russia from the G20, but I haven't heard that there was the possibility or the mention of excluding Russia from the United Nations. The only thing that I can think of, the only example that I can think of is South Africa under apartheid. And of course, you have to remember that South Africa was not a member of the Security Council, and least of all, a permanent member. But there is a procedure under which, before every meeting of the General Assembly, every session of the General Assembly of the United Nations, which starts, as you know, in September, there is something called the Credentials Committee, which looks at the credentials of every delegation from every member state. And the procedure that was followed in the 1970s and 80s with respect to South Africa was that the Credentials Committee refused to accept that the delegation appointed by the South African government, the apartheid regime of South Africa at the time, the Credentials Committee refused to accept the credentials of that particular delegation. And that meant that South Africa was unable to attend meetings of the General Assembly. And if this war goes on, until September, which I hope it will not, that is perhaps a procedure that might be applied against Russia. For that, of course, you would need a majority of the member states of the United Nations, which would follow that line. And it's too early, to speculate about that. But with my experience, I think that's the only way of damaging Russian interests at the United Nations. Certainly, expulsion. I'm not even sure that the charter provides for expulsion. I don't think it has ever been the case that a country was excluded or expelled from the United Nations. I mean, the only example that I can think of is the one that I just mentioned, South Africa, the South African delegation's credentials not being accepted as representing the people or the nation of South Africa. Other than that, I don't see what could be done.
I see. So it is indeed a bridge too far. Mr. Kuneralp, it's good to have you with us, as always, and thank you for making sense of it all.
Well, thank you, Murat, for inviting me.
Always a pleasure. And in other news, it looks like President Erdoğan is turning a new leaf, both in foreign relations and in domestic politics. Now, it used to be that President and AKP's bread and butter was taking a tough stance towards the West and in the region. But recently, Turkey has shifted from a troublemaker to a peace broker. How is that going to fare with AKP's voter bloc? Additionally, AKP is introducing a new election bill that looks to render coalitions moot. What does that mean for AKP's longtime ally and Turkey's Nationalist Party, MHP? Is AKP cutting dead weight? Edgar Şar is going to be on in just a minute to answer that question. But let's get the details first.
On March 17, 2022, the ruling coalition submitted a new election bill that looks to drastically alter electoral politics in Turkey. A 15-article bill prepared by AKP and MHP, which proposes changes in the election laws, was announced in a joint press conference held in the Turkish Great National Assembly on Monday by AKP Deputy Chairman Hayati Yazıcı and MHP Deputy Chairman Fethi Yıldız. Some of the proposed changes in the election laws is the reduction of the electoral threshold from 10% to 7%, making it possible for smaller parties to gain seats in the parliament. Another, more controversial item on the bill, however, may allow the president to use state funds for campaign financing. Another notable change concerns how representatives are elected. In the current arrangement, parties participating in the alliance were deemed to have passed the threshold when a party within the alliance passed the country threshold, and the number of deputies to be issued by the party was determined according to the votes they received within the alliance. The proposed system eliminates the accession of coalition parties that have not passed the electoral threshold and distribute seats relative to their votes, making it more difficult for smaller parties to grab seats in the parliament.
Joining me now, Medyascope's very own Turkish domestic politics extraordinaire. I think you might recognize him, Edgar Şar. Edgar, glad I could finally get you on.
Thank you for having me, Murat.
It's our absolute pleasure. Now, Edgar, I'm a layman in Turkish politics, but it would appear to me that AKP's previous strategy in carterizing its voter base was to take a tough stance against the West and the region to portray itself as a defender against the potential foreign threats. I mean, there was no one President Erdoğan wasn't willing to pick a fight with. Europe, US, Israel, you name it. But now Turkey is, for the lack of a better term, rebranding itself as a peacemaker. We've got President Erdoğan hosting dozens of heads of states, making nice with Israel, attempting to broker a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine. Now, do you see the ruling party shifting towards a new domestic strategy? And how effective do you think that will be?
Well, I would agree that it's always been a part of Erdoğan's game to apply a kind of anti-Western populism. And it's a fact that this got him some support, electorally speaking. However, now the circumstances are very different. If we question the success or effectiveness of a strategy or a policy of the governing bloc, then we should take into consideration the only purpose of the governing bloc, which is to stay in power. So to stay in power, you have to win the elections. And the research shows, many research actually shows, that the most important parameter that affects the voting behavior in Turkey has been economy, the economic crisis, unemployment, and I mean, probably most of all, inflation. Day-to-day inflation that affects the daily lives of people. So this is the change. This is now the new circumstances. So let's look at the foreign policy. It's a fact that the Ukrainian crisis, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, will make a substantial change in the geopolitical landscape. It's another fact that Turkey's position within the changing geopolitical landscape will make it even more important than it's been recently, creating a kind of Cold War effect. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that the most important problems that Turkey's electorate, gives importance, like economy, unemployment, will be influenced positively by these changing circumstances, by this changing landscape. And we can even argue that these problems will be bigger, and that these problems will even sharpen the economic crisis now in Turkey, with the expectations in tourism, also in agriculture and everything. So, I mean, having said all these, I would argue that, as much as Erdoğan is now trying to be much more friendly to Turkey's Western allies, and as much as this changing foreign policy may create a positive, kind of mood in the foreign policy circles, I don't think it will have a game changer effect in how difficult it will be for Erdoğan to get the support of the majority of Turkish electorate, and which is very much related to its only goal, which is to stay in power. So I have some doubts about the effectiveness of this foreign policy dynamics about realizing his purpose to stay in power.
I see. So to quote the former President Bill Clinton, it's the economy, stupid, right? Now, Edgar, let's talk a little bit about this new election bill. It's very likely to pass and change the very way parliament seats are allocated. Now, it looks like the new election bill is going to render coalitions irrelevant. The AKP-MHP coalition has been instrumental in attaining and maintaining majority seats for the ruling government. Now, it looks like MHP has been slowly losing votes over the years. In 2015, MHP grabbed 16% of the votes, and in 2015 fell to 12% and then to 11% in 2018. Now, can you tell us a little bit about the motivations behind passing this new election bill? And I think the question everyone wants answered is AKP trying to cut MHP loose? Has MHP become more of a liability? Your thoughts?
Well, these changes in the electoral law have been, very much argued since last week. And as far as I saw, the focus in these arguments has been on the quote-unquote smaller parties. And many argue that, it will be very hard for the smaller parties to get parliamentary seats with these changes in the electoral law, which is not true. I mean, it will be as hard as for these smaller parties to get parliamentary seats as in the past. These changes do not change anything. These amendments do not change anything with regard to that. So the target of these changes is not particularly the smaller parties. I think the target is the opposition coordination itself, because with these changes, with the change of how the seats are allocated, it will not anymore possible for the bigger parties of an opposition alliance to make use of the surplus votes of the smaller parties, which are not translated into parliamentary seats, to get more seats in the parliament. So this law, therefore, targets the opposition coordination itself. It demotivates the bigger parties to ally themselves with the smaller parties because they will not anymore make use of the small votes, quote unquote, of these smaller parties. And on the other hand, it will also demotivate the smaller parties of Turkey to ally themselves with these bigger parties, because they will have to enter the elections under the lists of these bigger parties, which is a bad news for the institutionalization of these newly founded parties. So, both sides, these amendments will have some negative effects on the both sides of the opposition alliance. That's why I argued that the target is the opposition coordination itself. However, this may also create a bigger incentive for the parties in the opposition to get even closer, to come together and stay together in spite of, maybe tens of reasons why they should not come together. With such amendments, the governing bloc actually facilitates the actors in the opposition to come together no matter what, because this is the only way to keep alive in Turkish politics. In this regard, I think if the opposition parties will manage to stay intact in their bloc, I think they will be able to, or they may be able to stay alive and survive these electoral changes, which I think is likely, as far as the news, the current news is concerned. So when we come to the rumors about a possible divorce between AKP and MHP, let me remind first that these amendments were prepared by a joint commission of AKP and MHP. So these amendments should not necessarily remind us or make us think about a possible divorce between AKP and MHP. And as far as I know, the rumors about a possible divorce are based on certain reasons why AKP and MHP, may like to break up. I mean, may like to leave the alliance or the coalition. Well, in electoral alliances, in political coalitions, there are always tens of reasons, maybe hundreds of reasons why a particular actor should leave the coalition, should leave the alliance, why an alliance should break up. However, if there are bigger reasons why they should, stay together no matter what, they will stay together, which I think has been the case for years now for AKP and MHP. There have always been problems, always been reasons why they should, divorce one another. But this has never been the case. And I think it will not be case this time either, because, the incentives they create for the opposition parties to stay intact, to stay together, for structural reasons, will also reinforce the governing alliance to stay intact, which, personally speaking, will be the case.
I see. Edgar, thanks for making sense of it all, and thanks for being able to come on tonight. I know you had a tight schedule today, but we got to do this again sometime.
Thanks, Murat, for having me.
All right, thanks for coming on. And in the economy, the Treasury is gearing up to send about $1 billion to depositors as the lira falls further in value. Just in 3 months, the lira has lost 26% of its value effective as of yesterday, leaving the Treasury to pick up the bill for currency-protected deposit accounts. For folks who might be unfamiliar, after continuously reducing central bank interest rates, President Erdoğan, in order to curb the lira's historic collapse in late 2021, announced that if you deposit money into a lira savings account, should the lira lose value against the dollar, the Treasury is going to pay you the difference of what you would have made if the lira had been stable. At 16% annual interest rate, that sounds like it's too good to be true. It's free money and a lot of it. Well, even that attractive of an offer couldn't curb lira's fall, unfortunately, and the taxpayers are paying the difference. So let's see how much the Treasury owes this quarter.
The currency-protected deposit accounts reached their maturity date this week. After the Turkish lira crash of late 2021, where the lira hit as low as 18 to the dollar, President Erdoğan announced the currency-protected deposit account system, where the Treasury would pay the difference if Turkish lira deposit accounts lost value against the dollar. On the announcement week, the lira was at 11 to the dollar, but is currently scratching 15 today, having lost 26% value since December. The deposit account pays 16% on a 3-month term, meaning that the difference will be paid for by the Treasury. A 10,000 lira deposit equaled $853 on December 24th at 11.72 to the dollar. At 16% annual interest rate on a 3-month term, the interest paid is 4% on the initial investment, which means the total gain from that account would have been 400 liras, leaving 10,400 liras in the account. On March 23rd, however, as the lira trades at 14.80 to the dollar, the account holder is owed a total sum of 12,628 liras, leaving the Treasury to pick up 2,228 liras in losses. According to Turkey's financial regulator, BBDK, the currency-protected deposit accounts had reached 561 billion liras in total value. Accounting for the losses in 3 months, the Treasury owes 14 billion liras to account holders, or a little under $1 billion.
And in domestic news, demonstrators clash with the police in Turkey's Adana province. But it's drawn more attention than usual this time because it's not your usual demonstrators. It's the Furkan Foundation. Furkan Foundation is a religious organization in Turkey that you'd be hard-pressed to call them moderate. The sect's leader is the highly controversial figure, Alparslan Kuytul. Educated in the Sharia faculty in Egypt, Kuytul and AKP have never gotten along. The reason being that the sect doesn't see AKP as being religious enough. Soon after the clash, disturbing images of handcuffed demonstrators being violently beaten by the police emerged. But Minister of Interior Süleyman Soylu, in charge of all internal security in Turkey, says that the cops were actually provoked, and provoking the police to grab videos of police brutality is the sect's usual MO. Now, before we go to the video, we have to warn that the images that you're about to see may be disturbing to some. And with that warning, let's go to that video.
The streets of Adana were in pandemonium last Sunday as members of the religious sect Furkan Foundation clashed with the police after they attempted a demonstration on the streets. Videos of police viciously beating members of the foundation surfaced soon thereafter. The organization is reportedly a supporter of the Islamic Caliphate and Sharia law. The Furkan Foundation is an ultra-religious sect headed by the controversial leader Alparslan Koytal. Koytal was previously arrested in 2018 for charges of establishing a criminal organization, as well as supporting a terror organization. He was released after serving 3 years and has continued to be vocal ever since. The ruling government and the Furkan Foundation have been publicly at odds for some time. Minister of Interior and Head of Interior Security Süleyman Soylu responded to the videos and insisted that the members of the foundation attempted to provoke the police into hitting them.
For 4 to 5 months, this group has carried out more than 50 illegal demonstrations, not only in Adana, but also in Mersin and other provinces. They go out on the street, they have cameras in their hands. They put children and women in front. They spit on the police, they try to hit them, and take videos. The duty of the state here was not to withdraw, but to restore public order.
Alparslan Koytal's spouse, Semra Koytal, spoke to Medyascope to give her side of the story. They are trying to erase us from society. When AKP first came to power, they acted like they were going to protect and promote Islamic groups. But we now see that none of these promises bore out. It was only a matter of pandering to certain demographics to collect their votes. That's why our sect has never been close to AKP.
And with that, that's it for us in This Week in Turkey. I have been Murat, Tursan, and thank you for joining us.
Türkiye'nin sivil, bağımsız, özgür ve çoğulcu bir medya ortamına ihtiyacı var. Medyascope, 20 Ağustos 2015'te bu ihtiyacı karşılamak üzere yola çıktı. Ama yolumuz uzun. Bu yolculukta bize Patreon veya YouTube'un katıl butonu üzerinden katkıda bulunabilirsiniz. Destek verin, sizinle güçlenelim.